The local market is small. They need to think global from day zero. I think it's the red pill, right, versus the blue pill in the matrix, right? And to take that red pill, they need the first 50K, 100K, 150K, right? If we have 10,000 startups out there paving their way, it will have a huge effect in the Portuguese economy.
好了，现在我们正在去赶往我们这次4天葡萄牙之行的最重要的，而且可能是非常有价值一站，因为我们要去的是 Startup Portugal。基本上所有的整个葡萄牙的这个 Startup 的生态都和这个组织有关系。那么他们支持很多葡萄牙的创业公司去生长，去做国际市场。那我们也遇到了这个 Startup Portugal 的这个老大，我们也跟他聊一聊，请他来介绍一下他怎么去看葡萄牙的科技生态。
Okay, great. So my name is Alex Santos. I'm currently the president of Startup Portugal. I've been in the startup world for almost 14 years now. And so in the last years, I've been doing a lot of investments around the world, getting a lot of exposure to what's happening globally in terms of the startup scene. So Startup Portugal is a private association with public utility. What that means is it was created by a set of founding members that is a mix of public entities with private entities to actually work towards promoting the Portuguese startups abroad and guaranteeing that all the initiatives, nationally speaking, are also better coordinated. So there's a strong link from Startup Portugal with the government and several public entities that are involved in everything that is related to entrepreneurship in Portugal and investment in Portugal in startups. So we had a really active role, for example, in the law that was really critical to define formally what is a startup. Until recently, before that law, you couldn't even have any public initiative towards trying to help startups because startup was basically an SME, right? Yeah. So the law was really critical to really define the difference between a startup and an SME, and that allowed all of us, all the stakeholders in the ecosystem, to start launching more initiatives, namely public initiatives that could better foster the support towards what could be done with startup. Actually, our example here in Portugal is now being used as a little bit as a benchmark for what is being defined at European level as well as how could we define a startup in the European sense as well. Basically, Startup Portugal, its mission, the sole purpose of trying to help founders being successful, namely abroad. By definition, a startup should be ambitious enough to try to explore the global markets, right? And so our sole purpose is to, in everything that we're doing, is in any initiative, is to actually see how we can support actively the founders and their goals to grow their business, globally speaking. So we manage different initiatives, some with the support of public entities and public money, and some that are done with private stakeholders as well. The other thing that we do is we coordinate everything that is related to the network of incubators around Portugal. So you met already a couple of them that are part of our network that we manage. We also had an initiative in place that we gave them also financial support. They can be better at what they're doing in terms of having the right. Another big initiative that we have is we're building a platform, a little bit like a deal room or pitch book, that allows us to understand from a helicopter view all the relevant numbers of who's who in the Portuguese ecosystem. So we're mapping all the startups that are Portuguese born, all the investors, all the founders, all the incubators, so that there's a single source of truth by which we can understand better on a regular basis what's happening, right, in terms of economic activity, growth of startups, the launch of new startups, who's dying as well, right? We have a common tool that can be used by any stakeholder when there's any initiative towards working the ecosystem. You understand the numbers behind them.
How do you see the big change in the local ecosystem? So what's the kind of driving power to boom the ecosystem?
Portugal is in a unique place. We saw a big change in the world with COVID, right?
Yeah.
The way of doing business changed. Nowadays, I think the world is flatter in the sense that you can close a lot more things remotely, right? And now we have, the AI wave that is the biggest of all waves, right? We had the mobile wave and the cloud wave that lowered the barriers. You can create a company. I think now with AI, it's even easier to create a company in any part of the world and be successful, right? And build something that can be global, right? And I think Portugal is in a unique position to take advantage of big changes in the world. The way that business is now conducted after COVID, and also the AI wave. Why? Because it's a unique trade. Of course, there are other small countries, but Portugal can take advantage of the fact that it's a small country. Why? Because it can be guaranteed that all the stakeholders are highly interconnected. And so it can be the test bed in Europe for anything that any startup wants to do. It can come to Portugal and do it and test it before it tries to take it global. The fact that we're small is also an advantage for a startup and Portuguese entrepreneurs as a country. Why? Because the local market is small. They need to think global from day zero. That's not normal. If you go to Spain, that is like 6 times bigger than Portugal, or you go to Germany, or you go to bigger countries, the entrepreneurs tend to talk first about what they're doing in their own country, right? I think one advantage that we have as well is it's a country that has been attracting a lot of international talent. And that talent is a multiplier for us as well, because typically it's talent that has more experience, that brings other ways of working that we're benefiting of. A lot of the local entrepreneurs are learning a lot with the talent that is coming from other parts of the world and are working here. So we're starting to see more and more a mix of startups that are born here.
If you look at the international market, Portuguese tech companies, how they can stand out in the international market?
Any startup, if they want to be global, they need to understand the different cultures out there. In the most market out there, you need to have an open mindset. You need to be able to hire talent from all parts of the world, and you need to know how to work in each part of the world, right? The best startups so far that were born in Portugal and are now global, they were able to enter early on into markets that by definition were not that easy to enter, right? But they were able to enter, build on top of their early success, build great teams, mixed teams with people from all over the world. The best examples, even from companies that are born in the US, that are growing the most, if you look at them, they have multiple locations, not only in the US, but in other parts of the world, right? And that's coming back to the point that I was making before. The world is flatter now, right?
How do you think of the Asian market?
I think it's a matter of making the known known. What I mean by that is we don't have a lot of exposure to what's happening in the Asian market, right? We need to have more exposure, right? Yeah. Because clearly it's a market that should be explored. Of course, as you were saying before, there's Asia Pacific as a whole has different realities, right? Different velocities, different ways of doing business, etc. Yeah. It's actually not homogeneous, but having that knowledge is something that we should provide to our founders, right? I think it's easier to go after Western markets because we grow up with a lot of the Western culture, right? Yeah. And a lot more exposure to the Western culture. But if you ask me, maybe a lot of startups would benefit a lot more in exploring Asia Pacific and those markets versus the markets that they're exploring, right, more naturally. But I think it's a matter of fostering a better knowledge of how you can tap into those markets. The way of doing business, it's different.
It seems like all the project, starting from university, then I feel we have very good system to transfer the technology from university or institution to the industry. But how do you think that's kind of advantage in Portugal?
We know that 50% of the startups go through an incubator in Portugal. A lot of the times the incubators didn't have tight connections to universities. Yeah. We still don't know the exact number to pinpoint currently how many are really born in universities, right? Because it's hard to understand if they were born in universities or they were then developed by people that left the university, and regardless of the role of the university, they created the company. Something that we still need to work on. Clearly, there's a lot of great knowledge in IP that is born in universities, but there's still a lot of initiatives that we should be working on more actively to foster a more direct connection of, okay, the IP was generated in the university and we were going to actively promote the spin-off. I think there's still a long way to go there. We have great talent within universities that needs more help in taking the plunge of becoming founders and entrepreneurs, right? I think it's the red pill, right, versus the blue pill in the matrix, right?
Later stage, probably just go for the international VC. It's not necessarily, to find someone from Portugal. Do you agree on that?
I agree. I think there's a gap in later stage, so there's not a lot of capital available locally to support companies in later stage, but that's not necessarily bad because I think networks of investors outside of Portugal. I think the biggest gap locally currently in terms of capital actually is at the base angels. First tickets, I think those are a little bit harder than they should be currently because a lot of the angel groups that were born in 2012 became VCs. And so they're investing a little bit later in seed stage and Series A. And so a lot of the successful angels became successful professional investors. Because in a relative sense, Portugal is not a rich country, I think we should foster more of that and have more actually incentives towards having people and institutions helping earlier on. Because that can broaden the range of startups that are supported early on and or even born. So we need to foster more people to take the red pill early on, right? Yeah. And to take that red pill, they need the first 50K, 100K, 150K, right?
How do you see the startup ecosystem in Portugal? Or what's your vision?
Hopefully in 5 years, you're going to hear a lot more about startups that were born in Portugal in the global markets. We are already pulling above our weight in terms of number of companies that are reach later stage. I think hopefully we're going to have more and more shining examples to that extent. And we're going to have a broader range of startups being born in Portugal, making waves globally speaking, right? Clearly, I think there's several studies that say any dollar that goes into startups has a 7 times multiplying effect. We achieve that multiplying effect at a larger scale in Portugal. We don't have a lot of companies in Portugal. If we have 10,000 startups out there paving their way, we'll have a huge effect in the Portuguese economy. That's our goal, at least.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much
thanks
for coming.